This story began on a night when winter tried to erase a life. A police officer driving through a silent mountain town, a young German shepherd who refused to keep walking, and a starving Doberman hiding beneath the snow. What happened next changed three lives forever. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Please leave your city and country in the comments. We love reading where our viewers are joining us from. If stories of hope, compassion, and second chances touch your heart, please take a moment to press subscribe and support our channel. It truly helps us continue sharing these life-changing stories. Now come with us into the storm and witness how one small act of loyalty became a miracle. Silverbrook, Colorado did not so much experience winter as it endured it. On the night everything began, the town lay under a sky the color of old iron, the kind that promised snow before the first flake ever fell. Wind curled through the narrow streets like a living thing, lifting powder from the sidewalks and pressing it against the windows of shuttered shops. Christmas lights blinked weakly in frozen yards. The mountains beyond town stood as dark silhouettes, patient and unbothered by human worry. At 9:17 p.m., Officer Nathan Hale turned his cruiser off Cedar Ridge Road and into the slow-moving storm. Nathan was 41 years old, 6 feet 2, broad in the shoulders from years of patrol work and volunteer search and rescue. His hair, once jet black, had begun surrendering to winter itself with streaks of silver at the temples. His face carried the calm weight of someone who had seen enough broken nights to stop being surprised by them, but not enough to stop caring. People in Silverbrook trusted him because he listened more than he spoke and never hurried a frightened voice. A decade earlier, the death of his younger brother in a highway accident had carved something permanent into his character: patience. Since then, he treated emergencies not as problems to solve, but as people to steady. In the back seat of the cruiser sat Kira, his German shepherd partner. She was 18 months old, all sleek muscle and alert intelligence, her coat the color of pale wheat with a black saddle across her back. Her eyes were amber and thoughtful, the kind that seemed to study not just the world but the intention behind it. Kira was unusually gentle for a working dog, cautious with children, tender with the elderly, and fiercely loyal to Nathan. As a puppy, she had been found tied behind an abandoned mill, half-starved, and it left her with a sensitivity toward fear in others that no amount of training could replace. She rarely barked unless something was truly wrong. Tonight, she was silent. Dispatch had reported nothing unusual. A quiet shift, slick roads, a few stalled vehicles. Nathan was on his way back toward the station when Kira rose from the seat, her ears angling forward. Her nose pressed to the side window, fog blooming on the glass. The cruiser rolled past a half-lit parking lot near an old closed hardware store at the edge of town. Then, without warning, Kira's body went rigid. Nathan slowed. The leash clipped to her harness tightened as she leaned hard toward the door. "Easy," he murmured, the way he always did, but she did not ease. He pulled the cruiser to the curb, tires crunching over ice, and shut off the engine. The wind rushed in the moment he opened the door, sharp as needles. Kira did not bolt. She stepped down, placed all four paws on the snow-dusted asphalt, and froze, her gaze fixed on a cluster of broken branches at the edge of the lot, where a fallen pine slumped against a concrete divider. Nathan followed her line of sight. At first, he saw nothing. Then the branches moved. He approached slowly, boots careful on the ice. Kira remained beside him, her body low, not in aggression but in something closer to reverence. Beneath the branches, pressed into the frozen ground, lay a young Doberman. He could not have been more than 8 or 9 months old. His frame was skeletal, ribs sharp beneath a dull, patchy coat. His paws were raw and split from cold concrete. His ears were pinned tight to his skull. When his head lifted, it did so with visible effort, and his eyes, large, dark, exhausted, locked on Nathan with the wary understanding of a creature who had learned too early that the world was not safe. Nathan crouched, careful to keep his shoulders turned slightly away, the way he did with frightened children and cornered animals alike. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly. The dog shuddered. Snow dusted his back. His breath was thin, almost inaudible. Kira moved forward one step and then stopped, lowering herself to the ground, her chest touching the ice. She inched closer on her elbows, stopped again, leaving a careful distance between herself and the trembling figure. Her tail made one small movement against the snow, hopeful and restrained. Nathan pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Hale. I've got an emergency animal situation at the old Ridgeway lot. Possible severe neglect, hypothermia. Request animal control and notify Silverbrook Vet Clinic for critical intake." The reply crackled back with confirmation. He removed his gloves and placed them slowly on the ground between himself and the dog. The Doberman flinched but did not move away. Kira let out a low, soft whine, not fear, not excitement, something closer to apology. The wind pushed harder, rattling the loose metal sign above the store. Snow began to fall in earnest. Animal control arrived within minutes. Marla Quinn, a stocky woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and a voice that never rose, knelt beside Nathan. She took in the scene with practiced speed. "He's in bad shape," she said quietly. "We need to move now." They slid a thermal blanket beneath the Doberman, careful not to force his limbs. Nathan supported the dog's chest while Marla checked his pulse. It was weak but steady. They carried him to the animal control van where a portable heater hummed. Kira followed, refusing to stay behind. Nathan clipped her leash short and she pressed close, her flank against the Doberman's narrow side, radiating warmth. For the first time since they had arrived, the dog's trembling eased. At the veterinary clinic, Dr. Lillian Moore, a slender woman in her 30s with calm eyes and steady hands, met them at the door. The exam room filled with the quiet urgency of professionals who knew time mattered. Temperature, dangerously low. Weight, far below normal. Severe dehydration. Dr. Moore started fluids immediately. The Doberman's breathing remained shallow, but his eyes followed Kira whenever she moved. "What's his name?" a tech asked. Nathan looked at the dog, at the gray ash of snow melting into his coat, at the quiet resilience in his gaze. "Ash," he said. Because the local shelter was over capacity and Ash required close monitoring, Animal Control approved a temporary foster placement under veterinary supervision. Nathan signed the emergency paperwork without hesitation. He did not yet understand why, only that Kira's paw rested on his boot as he did, the way she always did when something important was happening. As they prepared to transport Ash for overnight observation, Kira leaned forward and pressed her nose gently against his shoulder, just once, as if sealing an agreement neither of them could articulate. Outside, the storm thickened, swallowing the streetlights one by one. Nathan stood in the doorway watching the snow cover the place where they had found him, and he had the strange and certain feeling that winter itself had just handed him a responsibility he could not refuse. The night closed around Silverbrook, and nothing in the town would be the same again. The storm had not yet finished with Silverbrook. Snow fell in slow, heavy sheets, thick enough to soften the edges of the world, thick enough to muffle the sound of the town's own breathing. Streetlights glowed like distant stars pressed too close to Earth. Inside the Silverbrook Veterinary Clinic, however, winter was held at bay by steady hands, warm light, and the quiet urgency of people who had learned to move without wasting a second. Officer Nathan Hale stood near the corner of exam room 2, jacket unzipped, gloves still in his pocket, his breath fogging slightly despite the heat. He had not sat down. He was not sure he could. Across the room, on a padded steel table wrapped in layers of blankets, lay Ash. In the clearer light, Ash looked even smaller than he had in the parking lot. His coat, once likely glossy and proud, was rubbed thin in uneven patches. The curve of his spine showed too sharply beneath his skin. His ribs rose and fell in shallow rhythm, each breath an effort, each breath a small victory. A thin IV line ran into his front leg. A temperature probe was taped gently to his inner thigh. His eyes, though dulled by exhaustion, remained open, tracking every movement in the room. At the foot of the table, Kira lay on the linoleum, her long legs tucked neatly beneath her, amber eyes never leaving him. She had refused to return to the cruiser. Refused the waiting area. refused everything that placed more than a few feet between herself and the Doberman puppy who had appeared in her world like a fragile question she had already decided to answer. Dr. Lillian Moore, still in her dark green scrubs, adjusted the drip rate on the IV with careful fingers. At 36, she carried the calm authority of someone who had learned how to hold life steady in her hands. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low knot, a few loose strands escaping around her temples, and her voice, when she spoke, was always just loud enough to reach the person who needed to hear it. "He's hypothermic," she said quietly, glancing toward Nathan. "Severely dehydrated, but his heart is strong. That matters. A lot." Nathan nodded once, his jaw tight. "Any idea how long he's been out there?" Dr. Moore shook her head. "Days, maybe longer. Hard to say. He's been running on survival alone for a while." From the doorway, Marla Quinn of Animal Control watched with her arms folded. Years in the field had given her a sturdy presence, like a woman carved from oak. "We're over capacity," she said, her tone apologetic but practical. "Shelter's full, and he's too fragile to move him around much anyway." Nathan's eyes shifted from Ash to Kira. The German shepherd's ears flicked slightly at the sound of Marla's voice, but her gaze never left the table. "What are our options?" Nathan asked. Dr. Moore hesitated, then met his eyes. "With his condition, he'll need monitoring for at least the next several weeks. Regular fluid therapy, temperature checks, gradual feeding schedule, minimal stress. He shouldn't be in a kennel environment if we can avoid it." Marla exhaled slowly. "We could do emergency foster placement. With supervision, temporary, just until he stabilizes." The room fell into a brief, heavy silence. Nathan felt the decision settling in his chest long before he spoke. He had seen that look in Kira before, the same one she'd had when they found the lost boy near Elk Ridge, the same one she'd had when the elderly woman collapsed on Main Street. It was the look that said, "This one is ours." "I'll take him," Nathan said. Marla lifted an eyebrow. "You're sure?" He nodded. "Yes." Kira's tail thumped once against the floor. They completed the paperwork in the small office down the hall. Emergency foster agreement, veterinary supervision, weekly check-ins with animal control. No transfer of ownership yet. Just time. Just care. When Nathan signed the last page, Kira stood and placed her paw on the toe of his boot, her eyes searching his face, as if confirming the promise had been made. They moved Ash to a heated recovery crate near the window. Nathan carried him, careful to keep his head supported, careful not to jar his fragile body. Ash weighed almost nothing in his arms. The Doberman's eyes fluttered, then closed. Not in fear this time, but in something closer to surrender. Kira followed the entire way, her body brushing the side of the crate once Ash was settled, her nose lingering near the opening as if she were breathing courage into him. The first night passed in pieces. Dr. Moore allowed Nathan to take Ash home with the IV secured and instructions printed in neat, serious rows. Nathan's small house on Pine Hollow Road was quiet and dark when they arrived, the porch light casting a pale circle over the snow-covered steps. Inside, Nathan laid thick blankets on the living room floor near the heating vent. Ash was placed gently in the center, still wrapped, still wired, still fighting. Kira lay beside him, not touching, but close enough that her warmth gathered around him like a shield. For the next 3 weeks, time changed its shape. Mornings began before sunrise. Nathan checked Ash's temperature, logged his breathing, administered fluids with hands that grew steadier each day. Dr. Moore visited twice a week. Marla stopped by with supplies and quiet encouragement. Ash learned to eat from a shallow dish, just a few spoonfuls at a time. Kira supervised every meal, her presence patient, her posture relaxed, as if teaching him without words that the bowl would not disappear, that no one would take it away. The first time Ash lifted his tail, just slightly, it felt like a miracle. The first time he placed his head on Kira's shoulder, Nathan had to turn away. Winter pressed against the windows, but inside the house something warmer was taking root. On the 19th day, Ash stood. His legs trembled, thin as saplings in wind, but he stood. Kira rose beside him, shoulder to shoulder, steadying without touching, the way mountains steady the horizon. Nathan knelt in front of them, the room silent except for the soft hum of the heater and the distant whisper of snow. "That's it," he murmured. "That's my boy." Ash's tail made one uncertain sweep. Outside, the storm had finally begun to break. Winter loosened its grip on Silverbrook slowly, the way an old guard releases a door only after checking that the world beyond it will not collapse. Snow still lined the streets in pale ridges, and the mountains remained draped in white, but the sun now lingered a little longer in the sky each afternoon, and light crept through the windows of Nathan Hale's small house on Pine Hollow Road with a gentler touch. The house itself was modest. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a narrow living room that still carried the faint smell of coffee and pine cleaner. Nathan had lived there alone for years. His routines were simple, his days defined by patrol shifts, quiet meals, and long runs with Kira before dawn. Since Ash's arrival, the house had changed its rhythm. Ash's recovery had reached a fragile but hopeful stage. Dr. Ishi Oksan Moore finally allowed him to leave the heated recovery crate and move freely under supervision. His legs were still thin, his frame still marked by hunger, but life had returned to his eyes. He followed Kira everywhere. Kira, now 20 months old, moved with calm assurance through the house. She had always been observant, but now her attentiveness carried a new gravity. She watched Ash eat, waited until he finished before touching her own food, nudged toys toward him, and then retreated to give him space. She seemed to understand that healing required patience, that trust could not be hurried. Nathan watched them from the kitchen doorway one morning, a mug of coffee warming his hands. Ash was learning how to play. Kira had brought out her favorite tennis ball, the one with half the fuzz missing, the one she guarded like treasure. She placed it gently in front of Ash, then backed away and sat. Ash stared at the ball as if it were a riddle written in a language he had not yet learned. His ears flicked, his nose twitched. He lifted one paw, touched the ball, then withdrew it as if expecting the floor to open. Kira's tail made a slow, hopeful sweep. Ash tried again. This time the ball rolled. He startled, stumbled back, then stopped. He looked at Kira. She did not move. She simply waited, her head tilted slightly, eyes soft. Finally, Ash pushed the ball with his nose. It rolled across the rug. Nathan's breath caught in his chest. Kira sprang up, but not in her usual wild burst of energy. She bounded once, then stopped, turned back to Ash, and lowered herself into a playbow, her front legs extended, her rear raised, inviting without pressure. Ash hesitated. Then he took 2 awkward steps forward. That was the first real game. From that morning on, the house became something else. Not just a shelter. A home. Nathan began leaving the back door open in the afternoons so the dogs could move freely between the kitchen and the small fenced yard. Kira showed Ash how to climb the porch steps, how to navigate the icy patches that still clung to the corners of the lawn, how to listen for the sound of Nathan's truck when he came home from shift. At night, Ash continued to choose the floor beside Kira's bed instead of the soft cushion Nathan had bought for him. Kira eventually abandoned her own bed and lay beside him on the floor, close enough that her tail brushed his paws. They slept back to back, their breathing falling into the same slow rhythm. It was in those quiet moments that Nathan realized how deeply the bond between them had formed. This was not companionship. It was something closer to recognition. Weeks passed. Ash gained weight. His coat grew shinier. The raw cracks on his paws healed. He learned the sound of the refrigerator door, the rhythm of the coffee maker, the way the house settled at night. He learned that the leash meant walks, and that the door always opened again after it closed. But the world beyond the fence still frightened him. The first time a delivery truck backfired on Pine Hollow Road, Ash froze. His body went rigid, his ears flattened, his breath came too fast. Nathan knelt in front of him, speaking gently, but it was Kira who solved the moment. She walked to Ash, pressed her shoulder against his, and stood still. The noise faded. Ash's breathing slowed. He began to check the world through her. If the wind rattled the porch railing, he looked at Kira. If a stranger passed the fence, he watched Kira's tail. If the doorbell rang, He waited for Kira's ears to decide. Nathan had seen police partners rely on one another this way. He had never seen it in dogs. One evening, Dr. Moore visited for a scheduled checkup. She knelt on the living room floor, examining Ash's heart, his lungs, his gums. Ash tolerated the process with only mild tension, his eyes flicking toward Kira whenever Dr. Moore's stethoscope touched him. "He's making remarkable progress," Dr. Moore said, standing. "Physically, he's nearly stable. Emotionally, that may take longer." Nathan nodded. "He's getting there." Dr. Moore looked at the two dogs, white and black, side by side in the fading light. "He will. He's not doing this alone." Later that night, Nathan sat at the kitchen table with a stack of papers spread before him. Veterinary bills, utility statements, rent agreement. The numbers were not dangerous yet, but they were leaning in that direction. The lease clause was clear. One dog permitted without additional fees. A second dog meant a monthly charge that would stretch Nathan's budget thin. He rubbed his eyes. He had not told Kira. He had not told Ash. He did not know how. The next morning, he called Marla at Animal Control. "What happens," he asked carefully, "when a foster period ends and the dog still needs placement?" Marla's voice was gentle. "We look for rescue partners, shelters, foster networks. We don't rush." Nathan thanked her and hung up. Ash sensed the shift before Nathan said anything. He began to eat faster again, his head lifting between bites, eyes darting. He slept closer to the front door. He followed Nathan from room to room, his tail low, his steps quiet. Kira noticed too. She stayed near Nathan's knee, watching his face the way she always had when something heavy moved behind his eyes. One evening, Nathan took them for a walk just as the sky turned the pale blue of early spring. The sidewalks were still edged with snow, but the air smelled of melting earth. Ash walked on Nathan's left. Kira on his right. Their steps matched. For a moment, the world felt balanced. Nathan stopped at the corner and looked down at them. Kira lifted her gaze. Ash did the same. He knelt and pressed his forehead briefly to Kira's, then to Ash's. "We're okay," he whispered, though he was not yet sure. The night closed around the small house on Pine Hollow Road, and inside, 3 lives breathed in the same space, held together by something stronger than fear. Outside, the last of winter waited, but it was already losing its claim. Spring arrived in Silverbrook the way it always did, quietly, as if afraid to disturb the snow. The mornings were still sharp with frost, but the afternoons carried a pale warmth that softened the town's edges. On Pine Hollow Road, Nathan Hale's small house stood with its windows open more often now, letting in the smell of thawing earth and pine sap from the nearby hills. Inside, life had settled into a gentle rhythm. Ash, now visibly stronger, greeted each morning with cautious hope. His coat had regained its sheen, his steps had steadied, and his eyes no longer carried the hollow distance of a creature waiting for the worst. Yet some part of him still lived in yesterday's shadows. Sudden sounds made him flinch. New places made him hesitate. He trusted Kira with a devotion so complete it bordered on awe. Kira, ever the quiet guardian, had assumed her role without ceremony. She walked slightly ahead on their morning routes, her tail loose, ears alert, setting the pace of the world for Ash. If she stopped, he stopped. If she lay down, he lay beside her. If she wagged, he followed the motion like a reflection, learning how to exist. Nathan watched them from the porch one afternoon as the snow finally began to retreat from the yard. He should have felt relief. Instead, a knot tightened in his chest. The envelope had arrived that morning. He had known it was coming. He had even rehearsed opening it. Still, when he slid the folded paper from its sleeve and read the words, "Second pet fee required," the air seemed to leave the room. The amount was not impossible, but it was heavy enough to force choices. Nathan sat at the kitchen table long after the coffee had gone cold. Utility bills, veterinary invoices, groceries, rent. The numbers arranged themselves into a quiet argument he could not win. From the hallway, Kira watched him. Her eyes, usually calm, searched his face. Ash hovered near the door, his body angled toward the outside, as if some older memory had begun to whisper. That night, Ash did not sleep beside Kira's bed. He chose the floor near the front door, his nose pointed toward the hallway. Kira noticed immediately. She stood, hesitated, then lay down beside him, pressing her side to his, refusing to let him face the darkness alone. 2 days later, Nathan called Marla. "I need to schedule intake," he said, his voice steady but wrong. "For a foster, Doberman, about 8 months old." Marla paused. "Are you sure?" "No," Nathan said, "but I don't see another way." They set the appointment for the following Monday. The house changed after that. Ash's appetite faltered. He ate like he had the first night, fast, anxious, glancing up between bites. Kira stayed close to Nathan, her eyes following every movement. When he reached for his keys, she rose with him. When he set them down, she exhaled and lay back at his feet. The night before the appointment, the snow returned. It was a thin, quiet snowfall, the kind that softened everything it touched. Nathan sat on the couch with the lights off, listening to the wind brush against the windows. Ash remained by the door, unmoving. Kira lay between them, her body a bridge that could not decide which side of the world needed her more. Morning came too quickly. They drove in silence. The rescue center sat on the far edge of town, a low building with warm windows and the distant sound of barking echoing from inside. Nathan parked and opened the back door. Kira jumped out first, then stopped, turning back to look at Ash as if checking that he was still there. Ash followed, his steps heavier than they had been in weeks. Inside, the lobby smelled of cleaner and nervous animals. The staff greeted them softly. Papers were placed on the counter. A leash was clipped to Ash's collar. When the volunteer turned toward the hallway marked intake, Kira's body changed. She surged forward, then dropped flat across the doorway. White fur spread across the tile like snow against the earth. She did not bark. She did not growl. She howled. The sound rose from deep in her chest, steady and unyielding. A voice too large for her body. The room froze. Ash stopped walking. His eyes locked on Kira, his legs trembling as if he had already learned how this story ended. The volunteer hesitated. "Sir," Nathan's chest ached. Kira scratched at the floor, nails clicking, her howl breaking only long enough to pull in another breath. Ash took one step toward the hallway, then stopped. His body shook. He looked back at her the way he had that night beneath the pine tree, as if the world beyond her was something he could not survive. Nathan dropped the pen. "Bring him back," he said. The volunteer blinked. "What?" "Please," Nathan said. "Bring him back." They returned Ash to the lobby. He launched himself into Kira, pressing his side against her with a force that made both of them slide across the tile. Kira stopped howling instantly. Her nose buried in his neck, her whole body went still. Nathan sank to the floor beside them. Marla arrived minutes later, her coat dusted with snow. She listened. She nodded. She made a call. A non-profit rescue partner agreed to sponsor part of the monthly fee, to provide food assistance, to keep the bonded pair together. New paperwork slid across the counter. This time, it was not surrender. It was adoption. Nathan signed with hands that finally felt steady again. Outside, the snow fell softly, as if winter itself had chosen to loosen its grip. Spring did not arrive all at once in Silverbrook. It crept in through the cracks left by winter, quiet and patient, as if unsure it was welcome. The mountains still wore their white crowns, but the streets had begun to breathe again, puddles forming where snow had once hardened into silence. On Pine Hollow Road, Nathan Hale's house no longer felt like a place he passed through between shifts. It felt anchored. The adoption papers lay folded in the kitchen drawer, their edges already soft from being touched too many times. Not because Nathan needed to check the words, he knew them by heart, but because he still marveled at the fact that something so fragile as ink could hold a family together. Ash discovered the yard. He stepped onto the thawing grass with a mixture of suspicion and wonder, lifting one paw as if the earth itself might betray him. Kira walked ahead, her stride confident, her ears tilted toward the distant mountains. When she paused, Ash paused. When she advanced, he followed. Their movements were no longer separate. They had become a rhythm. Nathan watched them from the porch, his coffee forgotten in his hand. He had grown used to the quiet now, the quiet that followed fear, the quiet that meant something had survived, but life had a way of testing new peace. The first real test came the night Iris, no, Kira, fell ill. It began with restlessness. She paced the living room, her breath coming faster than usual, her ears flattening for no reason Nathan could see. Ash noticed before Nathan did. He rose from his place near the wall and followed her, his steps silent, his gaze fixed on her flank. When Kira lay down, Ash stood over her. He did not whine. He did not bark. He walked to Nathan's bedroom and nudged his hand with his nose, then turned and walked away. When Nathan did not follow, Ash returned, more insistent, his eyes locked on Nathan's face. Nathan sat up. "What is it, boy?" Ash turned again, waited. Nathan followed. Kira was trembling. They drove to the emergency vet with the windows open to the cold night, the dashboard clock blinking past midnight. The diagnosis was minor, a stomach issue, easily treated, but the moment itself stayed with Nathan. The dog who once collapsed into himself at every loud sound had now chosen to seek help for someone else. Kira recovered quickly. Ash never left her side. Weeks passed. Their morning walks became a small procession down Pine Hollow Road, Kira leading with that steady, confident trot of hers, Ash at her shoulder, no longer scanning every parked car and shadow, but checking in with her instead. If she said the world was safe, he believed her. The house filled with new sounds, the clack of 2 sets of nails on tile, the thump of bodies dropping onto the rug, the soft sighs of dogs settling into sleep at night. The children from the neighboring house began stopping by after school, sitting on the floor with their homework while the dogs lay at their feet, breathing slow and steady, turning the living room into something gentler than any furniture ever could. Sometimes Nathan caught them asleep together, their faces pressed close, white fur against black. Their breathing synchronized so perfectly, it was impossible to tell where one heartbeat ended and the other began. One afternoon, friends visited with their own dog, a bouncy little mixed breed full of noise and unfiltered joy. The old Ash would have frozen, fear locking his muscles. This Ash did not. He paused, looked at Kira. She wagged once, easy and slow. Ash stepped forward and lay down in front of the newcomer, his front legs stretched out, tail giving a careful invitation. It was not submission. It was peace. Nathan felt something loosen in his chest. Winter tried once more. A late-season storm swept down from the mountains without warning, the kind that erased roads and stole heat. The power flickered. The wind clawed at the windows. Snow piled against the door. Inside, the dogs curled together near the fireplace, their bodies forming a small wall of warmth against the cold that pressed in from all sides. Nathan sat on the floor with them, one hand resting on each broad back, listening to the storm rage and fail. Ash slept. Kira dreamed. Morning came, the snow melted again. Spring held. Nathan stood in the yard, watching the dogs chase each other across grass that had finally remembered it was green. Ash ran harder now, faster, his long legs no longer hesitant, his laugh of a bark carrying into the open sky. Kira chased him, caught him, released him, always returning to his side. Nathan realized then that winter had not been their enemy. It had been their beginning. By the time summer brushed its fingers across Silverbrook, the town itself seemed to breathe differently. The mountains shed their last streaks of snow. The river at the edge of Pine Hollow Road ran faster, louder, carrying away the memory of ice. Storefronts opened their doors in the mornings and left them that way, as if no one feared the cold anymore. And inside the small house at the bend of the road, 3 lives had learned the shape of peace. Nathan Hale no longer woke in the night listening for the wind. He woke to the sound of 2 sets of paws padding down the hallway, the soft thump of bodies settling near the bed, the steady breathing of dogs who trusted the world enough to sleep deeply. Ash now moved through the house as if he had always belonged there. His coat shone black in the sunlight. His ribs were no longer visible. His steps were sure. When he ran, he did not run from anything. He ran toward life. Kira, at nearly 2 years old, had grown into herself. The quiet seriousness of her puppyhood softened into something steady and radiant. She carried her confidence lightly, the way strong things do. Wherever she went, Ash followed. Not because he was afraid to be alone, but because some part of him recognized that their paths were meant to share the same direction. One evening, Nathan sat on the front steps watching the sky fade from gold to lavender. Kira lay at his feet. Ash stretched out beside her. Their tails overlapped. A neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Whitcomb, paused at the gate with her old cardigan wrapped tight against the breeze. She was in her late 70s, short and round, with silver hair that never quite obeyed gravity. Since her husband's passing 2 years earlier, she often walked in the evenings just to hear other people's voices. "Those dogs of yours," she said, smiling, "they don't look like the same animals you brought home in winter." Nathan returned the smile. "I don't think they are." She studied them for a moment. "Neither are you." When she continued down the road, Nathan felt the truth of it settle in his chest. That night, the dogs lay together in the living room, their heads touching, the summer air drifting in through the open windows. Nathan realized how far they had all traveled since the snow. He had once believed that some things were broken beyond repair, that the past carved its shape into the future and never let go. Ash had proven him wrong. Kira had insisted on it. A few days later, Nathan took them both to the ridge above town where the view stretched all the way to the blue curve of the distant hills. The trail wound through wildflowers and soft grass. Ash hesitated at first, then followed Kira up the slope, his long stride carrying him higher, faster, freer than he had ever been. At the summit, they stood together, the wind lifting Kira's fur, Ash's ears pointed forward, their bodies aligned like a single living compass. Nathan knelt between them and rested a hand on each strong back. "I didn't plan this," he said softly, "but I'm grateful for it." Kira turned her head and pressed her forehead to his shoulder. Ash licked his wrist. It was enough. That night, long after the house had fallen quiet, Nathan woke to movement. He found the dogs at the window standing side by side, watching the moon. For a moment, none of them spoke or moved. Nathan realized then what winter had taught him. Some storms do not come to destroy. They come to reveal what will not be destroyed. Ash, who had once been invisible in the snow, was now impossible to overlook. Kira, who had once refused to move, had changed the direction of 3 lives. And Nathan, who had once walked the streets of Silverbrook believing he was alone, now returned each night to a home that waited for him. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Inside, the world was finally still. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or light. They arrive quietly through compassion, through one heart that refuses to walk away. This story reminds us that God often works through ordinary moments. A walk on a cold night, a choice to stop, a decision to care when it would have been easier to keep going. In our own lives, we all pass moments like that every day. Someone in pain, someone unseen, someone hoping we will notice. And when we choose love over comfort, we become part of God's miracle too. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone you love. Leave a comment and tell us what this story means to you. And if you believe in hope and kindness and in second chances, please subscribe and support our channel so we can keep bringing you these stories. May God bless every viewer watching today. May He protect your home, your family, and your heart. If you believe in this message, please type Amen in the comments. And once again, thank you for supporting our channel and being part of this journey.